is what's it called? A gray huge panel that pops out, and it has many different sections in it. And one of those sections there is a questions panel, and I want you to please ask as many questions as you desire to ask. And I say that because this is one of our most demanded and most attended webinars of the series so far. And so clearly there's a lot of interest. Clearly there's a lot of people thinking about Modelcheck and wanting to use it, or maybe using it or having difficulties or whatever the case may be. And so we want to make sure that whatever questions you have coming onto this webinar, we address them, either live here or afterwards. Once after the webinar, I can send you an email one-on-one. And so please, throughout the webinar, even right now, you can start typing in your questions into that questions panel. And the more questions we have, the better the entire webinar experience will be, because the more knowledge we can share all about. And also, the second thing I'll also do as well, by way of introduction, is to show a couple of poll questions, and again, this will better help me gauge the audience and see what everyone is currently used to. And so I'll go ahead and launch the first poll question, and it basically is asking, okay, so what is your current level of experience with Modelcheck? Or a level of awareness with it. So do you use it often? You've heard of it before, but you don't use it as much, or you have no clue what Modelcheck is, and you want to have this inform you of that. And so just pick whichever one's appropriate for you. We'll give a few more seconds for everyone to vote, and then we'll close that. Okay, looks like we have a good number of people voted already. So I'll go ahead and close that. And if I share the response, basically it comes out to some people currently use it often. Others don't know what it is, but the overwhelming majority looks like you've had some prior awareness of Modelcheck, or you have some idea of what it is, and you're looking to this webinar to provide more on that. And so in order to further dial it down, I have a couple more questions here. So next is for those of you that either currently use it or have heard of it, how often do you use Modelcheck? So you use it a lot, currently, or maybe you used it at your last company, or you would like to use it more often. And then also, the other parts of it there, are you want to use it, but you don't even know how to set it up. That's also a big thing we sometimes see. So we'd like to gauge very well the level of awareness of a need for that. And so we'll give it a few more seconds here for people to vote. And then we'll... Okay. Okay. Okay, it looks like we have a critical mass of people voted, and so we'll go ahead and close that. And if I share the poll, basically it looks like a small percentage of people have used it or are currently using it. Some people would like to use it more often. About 25% of you want to know why to consider using it. And it looks like the overwhelming majority, about 1 in 2 people, would like to use it, but have set up questions or issues when it comes to how to set up Modelcheck. And okay, so we'll go ahead and hide that. And then the last thing to this last question here, which this probably focuses it even deeper, is asking, okay, so for is Modelcheck implementation an issue for you? So are there people that you tried implementing it and it didn't work for you, or you were able to implement it successfully, or you don't even know what to do to or why you need to implement Modelcheck. And so we'll give a few more seconds here for people to vote on these, and then we'll go ahead and continue along. Okay, so it looks like we have a critical number of people already voted. And so we'll go ahead and close this. And I'll just share the poll results as well. And so sort of similar to the others, in that in this case, about 40% of you have, tried to implement it and it didn't work. Others don't know why you need to implement it, and only a small percentage are actually able to implement it successfully. Okay, and so we'll also speak to that as well. Now, I will mention from the outset. So the first part of the presentation is really just going to be some quick introduction. We're just going to talk quickly about who Boundary Systems is, and then we'll go ahead and dive into Modelcheck, and then a demo afterwards. And so first off, Boundary Systems. So we are a product development consulting company based out of Cleveland, but by no means limited to Cleveland. We operate in Ohio and every state that touches Ohio, and even in general the entire United States. We have training centers scattered all over the U.S., and we do everything from CAD data management to CAD design and consulting, which Modelcheck falls under, to CAD simulations, as well as product lifecycle management as well. And so we'll skip the intro for now and dive into Modelcheck. And so first off, what is Modelcheck? I know some of you mentioned you weren't aware of what it is. So Modelcheck is basically a model analysis tool that helps you enforce good design quality and company standards. And so in other words, you can basically think of it almost in a certain sense as a cop that sits there, and while as you're building your model, or every time you request Modelcheck to do it, it'll analyze your model and pull out certain flags that are problematic in the model that you're working on. So that way, issues that you need to fix or take a look at, or things like that, it'll begin to highlight those, and then that gives you an idea of what to fix, and what potential issues are in your model. Now, that then begs the question, why even use or consider Modelcheck? And so the next part of this here is, so first off, Modelcheck, in general, there are 3 major reasons to use it. So the first off is usually going to be like company standards violations. And so that's a case where we know companies that are trying to enforce certain standards on how they model, how they store information in their CAD CAD files, and they want to enforce that across the entire user base. So it could be something as simple as, naming and populating parameters correctly, because the company knows, after you make your CAD file, we check them into our PDM system. Well, if we have half the engineering department have a parameter called part number, and the rest half call the same parameter PN in their models, then it's going to be fairly difficult for the PDM system to search by part number, because they're different parameter names for the same entity. And so something as simple as that, to where Modelcheck can check and make sure that it's the same company standard template across the entire CAD file database. So that way it facilitates sharing. Another reason to use it is when it comes to poor modeling practices. And so Modelcheck can not only check for standards, but it can also analyze your CAD model for any potential issues that could cost you time or money down the road to fix. And so that could be due to round children or buried features or things like that. And it quickly analyzes the model and highlights those for you, so that way you can go ahead and fix those. Now that middle bullet there, that could be due to either lack of training or poor training beforehand, on the user's perspective, or it could just it could be trained well. It could just be due to a lapse in concentration, or being tired and placing around somewhere, or placing another feature as a child of a chamfer. And Modelcheck will catch those and then alert you to them, so that way it doesn't go ahead and bite you down the road. And again, just to sort of speak to that middle issue there, it's something that whether customers are aware of it or not, really affects them, and it's something where with Modelcheck you can begin to highlight some of those issues. And so, for example, there was a customer that contacted us saying, hey, we're experiencing huge regeneration times. So whenever we open a model to change a dimension or change a print or a drawing, it takes a while for Creo to load up. And so they sent me one of their models, and it had probably, I don't know, upwards of 500 parts. And the first thing I did in opening it in Creo was to run Modelcheck. And in less than 10 seconds, Modelcheck comes back and says, hey, there are, over 20 buried features in this model. And so in other words, there were more than 20 features in the model tree that Creo had to spend time regenerating, but did not contribute in any way to the geometrical look of the model. So in other words, by deleting those 20 or so buried features, we sped up the regeneration time by over 30%. And all of that I spotted in 10 seconds of Modelcheck analyzing their model. And so that again goes to the huge benefit for checking those things using Modelcheck. And then the last major bucket there is Modelcheck can analyze or check for certain manufacturability or production problems. And so some of those could be, for example, something like standard hole sizes. So we know that our manufacturing or shop floor says, hey, this is our list of acceptable hole sizes, because we have all of these, and it's easy for us to manufacture these. Anything outside of this, then that increases our production cost, right? Well, Modelcheck can quickly analyze your model to make sure that, okay, yes, all of the holes in here meet our standard diameter requirements. Another example there would be, for example, for models that are going to be 3D printed. One of the checks Modelcheck can easily do is to generate an STL of the model on the fly. And at every point while you're modeling, it can check to see, can I generate an STL of this model? If yes, then you're good. If no, I'll flag you, because if you're eventually going to 3D print this, then that's going to be a problem down the road. And so just very quick and simple things like that can end up saving you time and money. Those are the things that Modelcheck looks out for. And then the other huge benefit, which I actually forgot to include in this slide, is that Modelcheck is free. So right now it comes with the base seat of Creo Parametric. So for those of you that currently own Creo, it's already included. In the cheapest base seat of Creo Parametric you could possibly own right now comes with Modelcheck. So it's not something where you need to go spend money to acquire. It's something that you already own, and really with just some implementation could save you a lot of time and money down the road. And so at this point, I'll pause here for a second and flip over to a demo of Modelcheck. All right. So in this case, actually, let me show the full model here. So this is an assembly model. It's a fairly small or simple assembly model, but it illustrates the Modelcheck point very well. And so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to open the rim and show Modelcheck operating from a part level. And so in order to run Modelcheck, you can basically go over here to say File, and then Prepare, and then Modelcheck Interactive. Now I know that there are many people that mentioned that you need some help configuring Modelcheck. The first thing I'll mention to that effect is that the default installation of Modelcheck comes already pre-configured with some sample checks already turned on. So I say sample because it's just an illustrative sample, but it may not be everything that your particular company needs. But if you've never even configured Modelcheck at all, and you go right now to your Creo installation and click on this button here, Modelcheck will run and it will analyze your model based on the sample checks that have already been pre-configured. And so a lot of times when people configure Modelcheck, it's really just taking a look at what the sample checks are and then saying, okay, yes, we want to keep this, no, we don't want to have this. And so I'll go ahead and run Modelcheck now, and it comes back with a report. And you'll notice, so it has a ton of different things that it checked for. In this case, there are over 60 different items that it checked for. Some of them are just information warnings. Others are checks that it looked for, and the model passed those checks. And so we can begin to then analyze this and see, okay, what's going on. So sort of the first bucket that I mentioned here was hole diameters, right? So this is one where it's not all bad in this model. Modelcheck analyzed all the holes in this model and said, okay, all the holes in this model have standard diameters based on the hole sizes that we have. Now that hole size chart that Modelcheck is checking against is something that is fully customizable within each implementation of Modelcheck. And so if you have different hole sizes, you can customize that for your own company. Now for the rest two buckets and sort of the other ways that Modelcheck analyzes models, it has either errors or warnings. And so typically errors are issues that more likely than not will cost you some time or money to fix, either currently or later on down the road. And so those are glaring issues that are a cost to the company, basically. And then warnings are things that may not be glaring issues, but you may want to fix because it helps enhance good modeling practice. And so to sort of to first start off, we'll look at some company standard violations. And so, for example, things like model name errors. That's one where, in this case, our company standard violation says, or our company standard says there should be some series of characters with an underscore and then anything else afterwards. Well, this model is not named that way. And so if that naming requirement is needed for our PDM system, this could be an issue. It also highlights things like, parameter errors. So in this case here, it begins to pop out or list different parameters that may have issues. So for example, let me see here. If I say missing parameters, yeah. So this pops out parameters that we know we want to have in the model, but in this current model are not listed there. And so we can begin to now populate that. And so if I say, okay, a list of designers, say this model was designed by Nancy, and I'll check that box. Let's see here. Volume, we'll say let's manufacture, I don't know, 100,000 of this. And we'll say let's add, and you'll notice it added both of those parameters successfully to my part. Let's see here. Yeah, it doesn't have the one from my designers there, but I can very easily go ahead and check that. Say parameters. Yeah, there it is, drawn by Nancy, and the volume now is 100,000. So other, company standard, issues could be things like, layers. So we know, for example, that, all of these layers are things we require in our company standard, CAD files, and we can, those don't currently exist, and we can add, all of them to, this model. Now, sort of the other big bucket of issues to look at that Modelcheck analyzes for is poor modeling practices. And so typically in that vein, what we do is we go here to things like say buried features, for example. And so this highlights or lets you see, if I may make this in half so I can see the model. So this shows you here, for example, if I pick on this feature and highlight it, you'll notice Modelcheck pops it out in the model, and I can very clearly see, right over here where those two, blue circles are, there's a buried feature right there. Now that looks like it's part of a pattern, and so I can go ahead and pick on that pattern and begin to investigate, where it is, and start to fix it. Okay, so actually there's a reference pattern of that, and for 5. Actually, let's do it this way. With Modelcheck, all I'll need to do here is say view references. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and it basically pops out the reference viewer and shows us, which feature it is in Creo. Yeah, and so in this case it's cut ID 8455, and so I can very clearly see here that's more than likely going to be, this guy right here. Yeah, so that's an additional hole that didn't need to be there, but it's basically on top of another hole. Now, other issues that Modelcheck, will pop out when it comes to bad modeling practices will be things, for example, like early rounds. So this is usually an issue because rounds can easily be suppressed or suppressed. And so in a case like that, when you suppress a round early in the model, then it could cause other features to fail. Or when you have features with edge references, well, if that edge goes missing or is rounded off, then those features will fail to regenerate. Or if you have, let's see, round children, again, likewise, if you suppress a round, because typically rounds are added as finishing features at the end, and so if they're ever suppressed, then any round children will also fail as well. And so those are some of the simple things that that Modelcheck will highlight for you to let you, to pull awareness to that in the model. And so at this point, I'll switch over to a different model we have, and in this case, this is a rotor, and I'll show a different way that Modelcheck works. So over here, you'll notice if I want to go ahead and run Modelcheck, there are a few different options here. First is Modelcheck Interactive, and the other is Regenerate. And then there's also Rule Check and a Geometry Check as well. So we'll go ahead and tackle the first two here. So for Modelcheck Interactive, that's where you click and have Modelcheck run on the fly and generate a report for you. Modelcheck Regenerate is where you have Modelcheck regenerate the model, or while you're modeling yourself, whenever you regenerate, it'll analyze the model. And so the key to that then is you don't want it to always pop out a list of 12 or 15 different errors like it did in the case of the rim. But while I'm modeling, if I have one or two issues that I just unintentionally created for myself, Modelcheck can pop out and tell me that while the model regenerates. So for example, it could be something as simple as this right here. So if I edit this here and I say, let's make this dimension 0.75, and I go ahead and regenerate, okay, you'll notice it pops out and says, okay, there are buried features. Now all I did was click on the regenerate button and it pulled that out. And if I go here and I analyze this model, actually let me pull this out and do that. Buried features. Let's highlight that. Okay, so that's over here. And now if I go ahead and take a look at that model, let's see, edit that. Okay, yeah, so I'll see here that is a 6 pattern, or I guess 6 feature hole pattern that increments at 72 degrees, and hence one hole is on top of another. And so if I quickly change that to say 60 degrees, accept, and now you'll notice it just regenerated, and Modelcheck didn't pull out any errors, because now everything is basically completed. So I regenerated again, and it says here Modelcheck process completed successfully, and it didn't pull out any errors. And so there are different ways for Modelcheck to run. One is you go click and ask it to run. Another is while you're modeling, while you're building things, whenever your model regenerates, or sometimes whenever you save the model, then it'll analyze and pull out a smaller list of issues that you need to fix, that are glaring issues that you most definitely don't want to save, or you don't want to continue modeling long term with those issues in there. Now the next category of things to look at in Modelcheck will be looking at it from an assembly level. And so from an assembly level, I'll notice this is an assembly of, I don't know, a few parts, probably at least 10 or 15 parts. And you can very quickly come here to Modelcheck and say, let's run a report. And you could do it a few different ways. You could do it on a specific component, or you could do it on only the top level assembly, or you could run it on the top level assembly and every sub-assembly and component as well. And you'll notice even for an all level check, it only ran in less than a second, and it pops out. And now I can look at issues that occur on the assembly level, like right here. So I can see where generic components are being used in an assembly, which is not advised as best practice. And we can also then, take a look at the checks on a per level basis. So for example here, this pops out all the different components and sub-assemblies and the number of errors or warnings in that model. And so I can go ahead and, for example, click here, and I can see that for this lug model, one of the warnings here is a duplicate models warning. And when I take a look here, I realize, okay, there's another model called lug released that's on my computer that matches that model by about 78%. And when I look at the number of features and the overall size, for the most part, those two are a fairly unique or a fairly identical match. And so this then begs the question, are you building something unique, or are you just rebuilding an already released CAD model that everyone has agreed upon in the company? And if so, why not use the released version instead of having to recreate something that then has to be approved and vetted and then released? Right. And so these are some of the issues that Modelcheck can catch, and this is one of the huge reasons why it's very, very beneficial. And so at this point, I'll pause here with this here, and we'll flip back to our PowerPoint. All right, and so questions, or time for questions. And so let's take a look at some of the questions here. Okay, so some of the questions that have come in, let's see. Okay. So some of the questions that have come in are things like, let's see here. You mentioned Modelcheck can standardize, or you can standardize company parameters, and you can set Modelcheck, to check for that. And it asks here, can you set Modelcheck to automatically rename a parameter or automatically add the parameters if they're missing upon save or regeneration? And the answer to that is yes. Modelcheck comes with an additional side to it, basically called Model Update, that whenever you're checking the models, and this is especially useful during batch mode. So if I have a list of 10, 20, 50 models that I just want to check offline without a user being there, I can analyze those and then have a Modelcheck update any of those potential simple issues that I don't need a user to be there to add. So for example, things like renaming parameters or adding company parameters. Those are things that Modelcheck can do without having to have a user authorize that, and so Modelcheck can very quickly add those to the model. Okay, so another question here is, can Modelcheck be used to audit the windshield database, or I guess the database or slash windshield? And the answer to that is yes. Modelcheck can be used, and Modelcheck can be used with windshield a couple of different ways. One of those is with the existing Windchill database, Modelcheck can be used to where you can analyze your models, and then correct any issues that are already there. Now, when it comes to correcting those are usually going to be issues that are that Modelcheck can automatically fix on the fly very quickly. So things like renaming parameters or adding layers or things like that. When it comes to a lot of like user issues or also manufacturability issues, those are things that would have to be while the user is using the model and he has it open. And the benefit to using that with Windchill is there's a potential to turn on something called Modelcheck Gatekeeper with Windchill, which basically means then that Windchill on its end will check to see if Modelcheck was run recently, and also what how many errors Modelcheck listed, and you can then configure your gatekeeper to only allow check-in for models that have a certain number of errors. So, for example, we could say for our Windchill server, don't check in any models that have greater than 3 errors and have not had Modelcheck run in the last 24 hours. And so then that inherently then means that the only models that will be checked in are models that are basically squeaky clean, or are models that are have a very, very low number of issues, basically. And there's another question here that says, can parameters be added automatically? And yes, the answer to that is a yes. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. So another question that pops out says, can Modelcheck be enforced using a config.sup or equivalent to force it to run on regenerate or by default? So let me see. So basically, can you force Modelcheck to always run? So the answer to that is yes. Yes. If I go to my my computer here, so you can see my screen. Let's see here. Okay. So if I take a look at my config.pro that I currently have running this session, yeah, wheel parts, there are a couple of different config options that are Modelcheck specific. The first is Modelcheck enabled, and that's usually, you want to set that to yes. And so you can have this option in a config.sup. The other is Modelcheck dir, and this points it to the directory where your Modelcheck configuration files are stored. Now, almost as a quick tip, when it comes to configuring this for Modelcheck, this particular config option was added in Creo 2. But in the earlier date codes of Creo 2, this was limited to a very small number of characters. And I want to say it was probably limited to about maybe 20 or 30 characters or so. And so if you had a path with more than that, it would ignore it, which was very frustrating. And so in the later date codes of Creo 2, and I forget which date code they actually switched it, they increased that path. And so if you see here, for example, I'm currently using Creo 3, and my path is definitely longer than 20 characters. And Modelcheck dir points to that new directory. So with those two set, that will turn on Modelcheck. And then in the Modelcheck config files, you can set it to run either on regen or in save. And then and then that would ensure that that Modelcheck runs, or you can enforce Modelcheck to run that way. Okay. So a few other questions that have come in here. Let me see. Okay, so the question is how to enable model check upon save. And there are also a couple other questions here about implementing model check. And so some people ask, how do you configure model check? Now that is usually a fairly broad question that speaks to many different issues, and so I'll try and tackle it as much as I can. And anyone that has any other questions can email me offline as well. I'll show my email address here if you guys want to take it down and ask and send me any emails. So first off, when it comes to model check, what we found is sorry. All right, so when it comes to model check, there are a couple of different things. First off, we have services where we can configure model check for customers, and so that's one where customers come to us and say, "Hey, we don't even have the time to figure this out. Can you guys configure it for us?" Knowing that these are a list of things we want to check for or enforce. And what we found when it comes to that is typically buy-in from basically everyone in the company has to be there, or at least buy-in from the key decision makers has to be there in order for you to use model check. So in other words, forcing model check down people's throats sometimes may not be the best approach, because then people would basically rebel against it. That's purely coming from a user standpoint. Now when it comes to implementing it, usually the way we approach it is first off determining what are the things we want to check for, and then from there taking a look at the model check checks and see what are the checks that will enable this to happen. So sometimes it could be just a simple check directly, sometimes it could be adding some conditions to checks to make it happen. Then once we have those checks to make it happen, then the question then becomes creating or configuring our configuration files to reflect those checks that we want to make our requirements happen. And so that's a case where we can customize that for customers. We also have training classes as well. So basically it's Creo admin training classes where we can train customers on how to perform admin work in Creo, and one of that, or part of that, includes configuring model check. And so that's a case where if you want to learn how to configure model check, we have training classes on that as well. And then we also have some people that say, okay, well, I want to learn how to do this on my own. You have some time to kill and you want to figure it out on your own. And the first place I would go to is going to be, let me see here. So if I'm in my Creo install directory, so in this case I'm on Creo 3, you go into your date code folder. Model check is going to be in common files, and then it's going to be over here where it's mod check, and it's going to be text in this folder here, and the configuration files are going to be in here. And so so basically the way it goes is this particular file, config init, is the very first file that model check will read to see should I turn on, and if I turn on, what all do I need to turn on, and where are the other areas I need to go in order to start. And then from there, Modelcheck will read in, the condition.mcc file, and that tells it basically what conditions it needs in order to run certain files. And so, for example, you could have something as simple as, say you're an international company that, you have some files that are in metric and some files that are in English units. And you want to check those on two different standards because, again, an accuracy in millimeters or meters is different from an accuracy in inches. That's one way you can use a condition file to say, hey, if you see the units in millimeters, check it using our, metrics Modelcheck settings file. And if you see the units in inches, check it using our, English units checking file. And then you have all the other different, configuration files like the, check files here, and then the start files, and then the different things like that. And this webinar, trust me, is not enough time to go into detail into all of that. But if you want to figure that out on your own, a huge way that I usually recommend people do it is to look at the help files. The Creo Parametric help documentation is really, really handy when it comes to looking at that. And so if I just go over here to Internet Explorer here, and I'll look for let's see here, it's going to be help.ptc.com. So yeah, I'll go to that one. Okay, and so this is one where we can then say, so for Creo 3.0, it's going to be model analysis, Creo Modelcheck, and this is everything that you would need to know on how to implement Modelcheck. And so everything from, about Modelcheck to, let me see here, Modelcheck operating modes. Okay, so configuring Modelcheck. Yeah, so this particular flowchart is one that I usually recommend to customers that want to figure it out on their own. Basically, it very quickly describes, a lot of the things you need to do in order to configure Modelcheck. So everything from the initialization file, which is the very first thing it reads. So whenever Modelcheck starts, to, if you're automatically loading the configuration files, then it's going to read in the condition.mcc file. If not, it's going to, you can set those files manually yourself. And then basically from that condition.mcc file, that tells it, which check file to use, which start file to use, and then constants file, and then the status file as well. And so from a high-level overview, the help files provide a pretty good launching pad to also configuring Modelcheck yourself as well. Yeah. Okay, so that basically covers a huge number of the questions that that were sent, and I know that there are a few other questions here that we failed to hit, and I will definitely respond to those offline. I'll send an email to each person that has asked those questions, so that way we make sure that we fully meet all your needs. And if you have any other questions as well, please pop them in here, because we'll go ahead and review those and reach out to everyone. Here, I'll do that. But yeah, and if you have any other questions as well, please don't hesitate to send me an email. But again, in the absence of that, we thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here for this webinar. and we'll end it here. And if you have any other questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to email us, and we'll be in touch with further answers on, again, how to configure Modelcheck. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.